It's great to be joined this morning by Dean McKenzie, the chair of RETA. Dean, thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask you to try and speak as much as you can in non-corporate speak, so those people watching at home can understand what you're talking about.
Don't think I've ever been described as corporate, Michael, but anyway, let's work from there.
Okay, RETA has been in working now for 3 months. What has RETA achieved so far that we may not have heard about?
Well, you probably need to go back to the reform process. I mean, RETA was born out of the first bill, if you like. So the first bill that the Minister put through in June included in that the transition of the Racing Board into the term that you've used, the Racing Industry Transition Agency. So we've been, in effect, established from the 1st of July, as you said, just under 3 months. And RETA was established to join together the work that had previously been done by the Ministerial Advisory Committee and also what they've termed the business as usual activities of the old Racing Board. So what we've been doing from the 1st of July is concentrating on both those functions. So on the change side of that agenda, if you like, has been a lot of development work around the second bill. So there is a second bill as part of the Minister's reform program that we're developing at the moment that hopefully will be in the House before Christmas. And so there's a lot of background work going on to that to establish the facts and figures, if you like, in the context of that bill. And certainly with managing the business as usual functions of the Racing Board is in itself a large task, as you're aware. So.
Okay, there's people watching this who think that's great. I'm glad there's some change going on. When does the money turn up? So we've been promised point of consumption tax money, Racefields legislation money, and obviously the government levy money, but we haven't seen any yet. So what stage do we start to see that trickle into, hopefully, stakes? Yeah,
look, and that's completely understandable because at the moment there's been an enormous amount of work done by a lot of very good people to get the industry to the point, from last April when the Minister announced the review that John Massara undertook on his behalf, from that point to the point we're at now, where we are probably 60 or 70% of the way through that reform process. So there's a lot of building blocks. It's like doing the hard yards, I guess, up front in the early minutes of a test match or the first half of a test match. If you don't lay the right foundation, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually win the match. So there's a lot of things that have been going on to build that foundation over the last 12 to 18 months, and certainly the approach that the Minister took was to ensure that as much of the revenue aspects of the reform program as possible were actually put into that first bill. So things that you've already described, the repeal of the betting levy, the establishment of the point of consumption and the betting information use charges and those types of things, most of those were put in the first bill, which of course is now law. So
for people at home, the betting information use charges is what we previously knew as the Racefields.
Yeah,
basically it means anybody betting overseas with us, overseas bookmakers, have to pay us a percentage of their turnover.
Yeah, so it's payment for use of our intellectual property for the domestic industries. Intellectual property, so that's right. So that money.
So is that money guaranteed, Dean? Are we absolutely certain it's in law now? It's been passed in the bill that those monies are going to turn up to the industry.
Absolutely. So the process, there is already money flowing from that already, and they're through voluntary agreements that the previous Racing Board or the current RETA team have engaged with overseas betting operators. So there is already money flowing from that. It has not yet been maximised because of the fact that once the legislation was passed, we need to ensure that the regulatory framework that governs that legislation is actually developed and put to bed. So that's currently underway.
In rough figures, so if we take the repeal of the betting levy, if we take the point of consumption tax and what was going to be known as the Racefields legislation, how much money do we see being wrapped up in those three initiatives? Is it a boost to the industry of around the $40 million mark, or is it more?
Look, I think you wander into dangerous territory because no one knows. I mean,
but you must have estimates, sure.
Well, there's estimates from point of consumption. There's some relatively new and it would novel, I think, is a word that's been described as some aspects of it, as in there's not a lot of international information or data to go on how much there might be out there. So how they go about trying to keep this as high level as possible, but estimating how much New Zealanders currently spend with offshore betting operators is not as easy as you would probably think, because there's quite a complex mechanism to try and collect that data, and so that's why I'm reluctant to put a number on it. It could be in the vicinity that you're saying. Yes, it could be. The betting levy is very easy because that's black and white. So currently the betting levy that the Minister has ensured has been repealed is around the $14 million per annum. Okay, so that's been repealed over 3 years, so that's pretty easy. Per year the industry has had a $14 million injection from that once it's fully repealed. In the case of the betting information use charges and the point of consumption, that's where things get a little bit more subjective as to what it could be. I think previously they've talked $1 million a month for information use charges / racefields type thing. Point of consumption's a little bit more difficult to estimate.
That's people who are in New Zealand betting with overseas operators.
Well, it's just point of consumption. So wherever you are, so if it's a New Zealander who places a bet somewhere, and then the betting operator that receives that bet has to pay a percentage of whatever that will be back to the relevant designated authority.
Let's say that figure's somewhere between 30 and 50. Let's give it lots of room to move, because we don't know that.
Well, let's just, whatever it is, it's money we didn't have. So you're talking, if you add the 12 and the 14 and throw in some point of consumption tax and simplifying some really complex issues here, but you are talking a lot of money, and you're talking in the vicinity of potentially that $25, $30, $40 million per annum. But again, I will underline the fact that those are estimates, and until you start doing something and start actually physically collecting that every month, you have to go into that with some cautious optimism to ensure that you don't spend money you don't have, because that's where the industry might have got itself into its current position, or certainly contributed to it. We for the last 2 years have been spending money that we haven't earned. So anyone at home can recognise that concept pretty easily. If your household income is at a level and you are spending more than what comes in the front door every week, at some point you're going to come under a bit of pressure.
So we stick to those figures. So, for example, that money's going to come into the system. We believe the TAB's annual result is not going to be what they wanted, and therefore will be a step backwards. How confident are you that the distribution to the codes and therefore their stake levels will be sustainable for the next 12 months?
Well, we've committed to that already. So we had our first board meeting on the 11th of July. It's funny how dates stick in your mind, but 11th of July. The next day we announced that we had made the commitment to retain the funding at its previous level, which, as I've already alluded to, was already at a level.
So how did you do that? If the result's not as good, have you had to borrow again to do that?
No, absolutely not. So one of the key principles of the Minister's writing instructions or driving instructions to us, if you like, as a board, has been that we're, this particular focus on the organisation's balance sheet. So it can't be deteriorated any further. So there has to be some more stringent and efficient mechanisms developed to ensure that we don't deteriorate our balance sheet anymore.
What does it mean?
That means that we have to operate the business better. So we have to grow revenue, we have to be more efficient in what we do. And to be fair, that's the whole industry. So the Minister's made that pretty clear, that out of this reform program, the industry has to commit to doing those things better. So it wasn't a hard decision to make, to keep and retain the funding at the level that we needed to at least ensure that that foundation that I've already referred to is as solid as we can get it. That doesn't mean that our job in making that happen is easy. In fact, quite the opposite. So we've already had 4 board meetings in 89 days or whatever, because there's a lot of challenges for our organisation in ensuring that we lay the best foundation possible.
So with the money we now know that is going to come through, it's been passed in the first bill and it will flow to racing, we presume, at some stage over the next year. What else, or what other areas do Rita see as able to gain more revenue? Because we need more money for stakes to go up. We need to get past the $200 million return to the industry. What have you and your board targeted as areas where that can be achieved?
So the reform program itself is a complex set of recommendations that John Massara has made to the Minister, and that government have signed off the overall intent, I think is the words that are used in the letter of expectation that we have, for the direction that the Massara report has put in place. So within that there is a number of different aspects which obviously contribute to the concept that you've referred to. In other words, more revenue, because it's pretty simple. It's just a business, as in, there's two ways to make it perform better, and that's one is to grow revenue, and the other is to do things better every day so that they cost you less to do. So, both those aspects come through the reform program, particularly around some of the duties that will be devolved from the old racing board to the codes, and that's a central part of John Massara's recommendations to the Minister around ensuring that the TAB from 1 July next year, once the second bill goes through hopefully and isn't enacted, that the TAB's sole job, if you like, or sole focus, is to generate and maximise the profit for the industry. So, if you like, it won't get caught up in some of the other aspects that it's had to under the previous government.
Let the codes run their own codes more.
That's right. So the betting operator does what it does. It sells bets and generates money for the industry so that the codes can govern their sport and be self-sufficient in that regard.
You and some of your team sat down with the executive. Now, that's the people who run the TAB, for want of a better saying. You sat down with them and reviewed the TAB's performance. Is it good enough?
Well, it can always be improved.
But is it good enough?
Well, it's clearly not, because we've been spending more than we've earned for the last 2 years. Now, that's not anyone's particular fault or any group's particular fault, because the industry agreed that funding, so the industry agreed to accept it. The racing board at the time agreed to enter that arrangement. So I think going backwards and looking for scapegoats or whatever other terminology you wish to use is just not helpful. It's not helpful for anyone. We can't change the past. The past is the past. Our board have been focused on making sure that going forward that we put all the right things in place to grow revenue, do things better, ensure that the minister's reform program is implemented and the riding or driving instructions that he's given us are adhered to.
Where does the new fixed odds betting platform sit with that? Because it is one saying, fixed odds betting platform, that makes a lot of people in the industry bristle. I've seen changes in it, and I think it's now starting to generate some of the revenue we hoped it would. Has it been a bad decision, a good decision, or do we simply not know yet?
Well, I think there'll be an argument you could form for all three of those, to be fair. But again, I think I'm a pretty pragmatic type of rooster. The betting platform's there. So the industry's invested a significant amount of money in it. So the decision's been made. So we've got to get on, all of us, and make the best we can of it. So what
you're saying is we basically just can't turn the thing off and tear those contracts up. We have this now, and we will have it for the foreseeable future.
Well, we've just got to get on and do the best we can with it. Look, can we improve things? Of course we can. Again, I've already referred to that. I don't think anyone would say that we can't improve things. No one would say that you can't improve the business.
John Allen is leaving the Racing Board now, Rita. He is leaving as the Chief Executive. So he is leaving from working underneath your board. You will need to employ a new Chief Executive at some stage. Mm-hmm. People seem to be outraged by the amount of money people on the executive team at the Racing Board get paid. John's was around $700,000 a year. Are we kidding ourselves as an industry if we're expecting to get good leaders and good CEOs who don't cost that? Because surely, is that not the market price for these sort of people?
Oh, you could definitely form an argument for that. My view on this is our board have discussed this, at the end of the day, if the organisation is functioning at its optimum level and generating the returns that the industry really want and need for it to grow, I don't think they'd care. So it's a subset of a bigger issue, if you like. They wouldn't know or care what the CE or the executive team got paid if they turned up on a Saturday or a Thursday night at Addington or Friday night at Alexandra Park or whatever it might be, and raced for the stake levels that made them want to continue to invest in the industry. So it is a byproduct of that, a natural byproduct. Because when someone sees something not running as well as they may perceive it should be run, well, then they look for reasons why that's the case. So I think we need to, as I say, legacy issues, and the past is the past. We can't change it. We have to just get on and ensure that as much of this new revenue stream money that the Minister has generated for the industry actually gets to the industry. Now that's a job for all of us, not just us at Rita. It's a job for the codes, it's a job for the clubs. Having been involved at all three levels in my time in racing, we can all play a part in making that happen, making things work better, be more efficient in what we do, generate more revenue so that the stakeholder, when they turn up on Friday night or Saturday at the races, they are actually racing for a stake that makes them feel that they can participate further and build their investment in the industry.
Have you got the board, the tools and the support at governmental level to get this done?
Absolutely, 100%. This is a generational opportunity.